guys, CJ here.
And I'm Blake. So today we're actually coming to you with a little bit of a interesting topic. We're going to discuss what we believe are the top 4 decks in the first tier, which are honestly the only 4 decks in the first tier of the meta for Warhammer Age of Sigmar Champions. And also we picked 4 decks out of the tier 2 list that we feel are pretty strong and are probably towards the top of tier 2 as well. So as far as the tier 1 is concerned, we have the 4 decks listed as Healing Trees, which is a Sylvaneth deck, Archon, which is the Risen deck, Rodigus, which is a Chaos deck, and Godrak, which is Destruction. So Healing Trees, that's actually my favorite deck. That's what I play majority of the time and what I will be playing competitively until either the next set or the next nerf, if they decide to destroy it even more.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because most of the cards that you run or ran for trees have all been touched. The Draca deck that you built originally,
Yeah.
or which is still probably a decent tier 2 deck, or the Healing Trees you run now, they've all been nerfed. I knew, both of us knew when it came out that it was going to be really, really good, but we didn't realize at the time how good it was going to be.
No, not at the time.
Luckily, Games Workshop and PlayFusion picked up on it.
Yeah, they did. And the nerfs that they rolled out with it were definitely necessary. I mean, before the nerfs, we were able to achieve, on a good setup, about 28 damage in one turn. Well, really, if you count the setup turns, it's more like 2 or 3 turns. But once you have your setup in place, the 2 actions that you have on your next turn, you were able to pump out 28 points of damage while healing also about 14 health. If they would not have nerfed the deck, this would be play this deck or don't play at all. And that's just not good. So it's a good thing that they nerfed it. Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with my cousin here that Draca is probably a decent second tier deck. I think that the reason that Healing Trees probably beat it out in ranking is because of the amount of healing that Healing Trees has. I mean, obviously it's in the name. Obviously it's got to have a lot of it. And when you look at the card, at the champion specifically, it doesn't look like it'd be a whole lot because you only heal 1 health per card that you discard. However, if you keep in mind the fact that you run Flowering Dryad, which when it is discarded, in and of itself heals 2, 1 discard with that card you're healing 4. And that's a considerable amount of damage, considering the average card typically deals around 3 points of damage, is what's we found to be the, I guess, average of what would be considered good damage. The thing with Healing Trees is most of the damage for the deck actually comes from a combination of the spell Primal Terror and the ability Trample Underfoot. So what Trample Underfoot does is it does 3 damage and allows you to discard a card to add it back to your hand. So you have a recyclable form of damage that you can consistently get off. It is a warrior ability, and you do run 2 wizards, so you are kind of limited down to 2 spots to play the card, which could present a problem. Most of the time I found it doesn't, even against decks like Vor's Control, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. I tend to usually have at least one of my 2 warrior lanes where I can at least play an ability, even if it's locked down for units, which is something that makes this deck unique in that most of the damage doesn't have to come from its units. Pretty much 9 out of the 10 times when you're using a unit in Sylvaneth, or Healing Trees specifically, it's more of the discard effect that you're doing and less of the actual card being in play. There are some problematic cards for this deck, specifically an unaligned spell that stops you from being able to heal. That can be highly problematic for Healing Trees. That's essentially what you're doing. I usually try and draw up early, kind of get my pieces in my hand, and then once I start playing the game, if my opponent can't knock me down in a few turns, it's typically That's all she wrote.
Goes from there. Yeah, it's mostly a combo-based deck, so you have to get your pieces in your hand. But once you get your combo, you don't have to put units down on the board. You don't have to have much stick on the board to be doing efficient things, and your healing makes everything else when you discard so much more efficient. I think that's what keeps it at the top. Is
Definitely.
You don't have to have much on your board. Most of it is in the hand, back in the hand when you discard, so you control most of it. Them having a ton of removals helps some, but your deck can still function pretty well.
Yeah,
without having things stick on the board.
The main thing that you really want to try and get stick is the one of the two spells that are primary. One of them is a setup spell. It's Metamorphosis, and what it does is on the first corner it does have no ability because it has an X. However, the second and third corners are both blank, and the effect of the card is you can discard a Sylvaneth unit to search your deck for a Sylvaneth unit and add it to your hand, and to search your discard pile for a Sylvaneth unit and add it to hand. So, and also with the way that the wording works, you discard first, so that card hits the graveyard, and you actually can grab the same card that you discard for the effect back with the effect. So even if you don't have a card in your discard already, just being able to discard allows you to grab the one from the discard. That card helps you set up for future plays, and it can also be used if you happen to be able to get a Primal Terror to stick with Metamorphosis, then it can actually be used as a part of your push for your damage. Probably not going to happen very often, but it definitely can. And when it does, it's disgusting. You will be doing most likely a minimum of 9 points of damage and healing a minimum of 6 every turn, which is an insane amount of health difference for a deck to be putting out.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem for most decks to deal with. We're going to go now to Archon, which is the Tier 1 Death deck. Right now in the meta, there's one of each faction, or Grand Alliance rather, in the top tier, which I don't know that that's ever happened throughout the life of the game. It's actually one of the most balanced metas that they've had since we've started playing.
Yeah.
But the Archon deck, the Death's Tier 1 deck, Archon is at the start of your turn. If this champion is disengaged, you may deploy a unit from your discard pile.
A Risen unit.
A Risen unit.
Yes.
Keywords, guys. Keywords. But essentially you use cards like Fuel the Gravetide, units that when they enter play, they require you to discard. You use those to set up your discard pile. And from there, you have a unit that when it's deployed, you can deploy a Risen unit on either side of it. So you can use multiples of those to chain deploying units to wherever you need on the board. You have units for creature removal, for unit removal, for spell removal. You have units that are just there for damage. You run the Feasting Vargeist to heal and draw. And you have a ton of different cards in addition to the Archon's effect itself that allow you to get all these back from the discard. And with your different options that you have to discard certain things in your hand, you can really dictate what you put where, and the abilities even let you replace units that are already on the board. So you can even, if something's in your way, you can move it, and you can there's one specific scenario, and we're not going to go over it now, but there's one scenario where you can't do this. But other than this exact example, you can pretty much put whatever unit you want on your board at any point in time, given you have the cards in your hand. But for the most part, you can get whatever you need wherever you need it every turn.
Well, and if your board's empty, really, you can, even if you don't have the cards in your hand, you can do that.
You can get them all back from the discard.
Yeah.
So it's a mid-range deck with a little control style, mid-range on the damage, control style built into it, and that's my version of it. There's other versions that try and do a little more damage and are worried less about the control. for me, knowing that there is no top end of damage, no matter the cards just don't exist for Risen to have a high end damage output, then to me you have to have some of the control element, or you're gonna be falling short just trying to get the damage, and it's just not there on the units. It's not there on the abilities. It's all mid-range damage for Risen units, and I think that's the best way. And giving you the versatility of the extra discards, I think that's huge for the deck. And then just being able to get 3 units on your board off of your champion's ability, and then just say, okay, I'm going to pass and draw 2 now. So you can deploy, 1 to 4 units technically, just on your champion's ability, and just draw 2 cards, which is inherently powerful.
Well, it would be 1 to 3 because
that's based on
placement.
That's
true. That's true.
You're looking at my specific layout, but
that's true. If you do have them on the far end, then yes, you could. Okay. Yeah, you definitely could then.
Mm-hmm. So, like he's talking about my layout, I can only do up to 3, which is plenty. I'll take 3 units for free whenever. But that's the gist of Archon, and we if we had to rank them, we'd have Healing Trees and Archon probably tied for first place right now.
Definitely. But an important thing that we need to discuss with Archon is how the fact that his effect actually triggers at the start of turn before the rotation phase. So a lot of the units that Archon runs will have an X on the first corner, and then they're like 1 rotation, and that's the ones that usually do a removal of some kind. So the thing is, you're before rotation phase happens, you're getting these things out, and then they immediately rotate, and you get your removal, and there's nothing your opponent can do to respond to the fact that you just pulled these things out. So the control aspect of it is so quick that it's very difficult to play around. And I've seen I've heard at least a lot of people saying that Healing Trees directly counters Archon. I venture to say that's wrong. I think Archon more counters Healing Trees than Healing Trees counters Archon, simply because of the fact that really for Healing Trees you want your spells to stick, and Archon has a copious amount of ways to just say no.
Yeah, I think that's my version of it more than what I've seen online or even in top 8 deck list or whatever.
Well, maybe online they have it wrong.
That's why we're here. That's why we're here.
Yeah, and we are going to do a deck profile, you guys, for these decks.
All of these. Yeah.
Right now, we're kind of waiting for a few cards to come in the mail before we do this, because we don't want to bring you content that seems imperfect or like we didn't put enough thought or effort into it. So we're going to wait for the deck profiles until we actually get our cards in. But don't worry, we're definitely bringing them. I know the first one that I want to do is Healing Trees.
It'll likely be Archon for the second. I don't know yet, but we'll probably go through the top tier of decks that we're going to discuss here, and then we'll branch off and do some tier 2 stuff and some more fun stuff from there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So that is Archon, and
ranked third we have Rodigus, which is a Chaos deck. I'm going to actually let my cousin tell you a little more about it, because I think he's a little more familiar with it than I am.
Yeah, okay. Well, Rodigus itself is a dual type champion that at the start of your turn, depending on if your opponent is engaged or disengaged, you'll either heal 1 or deal 1. So it's an automatic point of life difference at the start of your turn, no matter what.
Which is good.
Which is huge, yeah. And there's different versions of this Rodigus Chaos deck. There's a heal version where you try and outlast your opponent and really extend the game to take more advantage of the Rodigus. And then there's versions that are more of the quick questing type, that the Rodigus is there just for a little extra oomph, and your other 3 champions, you're going to quick quest, you're going to play all the typical high damage abilities that you run, the Reckless Charge, the Putrid Offering,
Furious Strike,
and all your last stand, your typical last stand, the units. There's not too much to say about Chaos because, and we've talked about this multiple times before, I feel like even though Rodigus is, I think, clearly the tier 1 of all of the Chaos decks, even above Scarbrand, which is more popular during the Wave 1 and Wave 2.
Wave 2 because it came out in Wave 2.
Oh, hey.
Yeah.
But it's been nerfed after Wave 3, and I think it didn't make it not playable at all. It balanced the card, just like when they did with the trees. I think they were pretty good when they nerfed things.
Yeah.
It's not taking anything out of the game. It's just putting it back on a level playing field.
Yeah. I can agree to that.
Yeah. But it's your typical last stand, just chaos burn. I don't know if there's anything particularly special in a Rodigus deck that would be different. You are allotted a wizard spot, which gives you options for things.
They run Rejoice and Slaughter.
Rejoice and Slaughter. Yes, Rejoice and Slaughter.
That card's fantastic.
Fantastic card, for sure. Yeah. And no matter which version of the Rodigus you're running, you're going to want the Rejoice and Slaughter. You're going to want the Last Stand. You're going to trigger them. You're going to draw a bunch of cards. And just keeps the deck going without having to spend a bunch of turns drawing up or playing inefficient draw cards that might just get instantly removed. Whereas with Rejoice and Slaughter, you can at least guarantee you're going to get one use of its effect off.
Which, for those who don't know what the effect is, it's a spell that has 2 corners, a value of 2 in the corner, and when one of your allies removes a unit, you draw rotation cards. Now, that unit that gets removed does not have to be an opponent's unit; it can be your own. So, what you can do is you can trigger it off of removing one of your Last Stand guys that either remove something else. In the case of, I believe the name is Wrathmonger, if I remember correctly, or one of the ones that does damage when it's removed. Or even if you see your opponent's playing a lot of spells, you could side in the unit. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but its Last Stand is remove a highlighted spell. Mm-hmm. So you could even potentially be able to counter spell-heavy decks while also drawing 2 cards when you remove the unit that has Last Stand. Mm-hmm. And in the case that your Last Stand unit also removes a unit, then you're actually drawing 4 cards instead of just 2 off of 1 action, which is ridiculous. And the fact that both corners are 2 means that you can actually hold on to your Rejoice and Slaughter and protect it from getting removed until you go to play the removal, like my cousin here was saying, guaranteeing that you at least get the 1 use off. Mm-hmm. And then if you have a way to remove something the next turn and they don't remove the Rejoice and Slaughter, then you're getting an insane amount of value off of a spell.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think that's it for Rodigus. Now, 4th for the Tier 1 decks, we have Godrak.
So, Godrak is also one of those decks that was probably, honestly, the king of the meta even just a set or 2 ago. Mm-hmm. Wave 1, definitely, Godrak was hands down the best meta deck. Mm-hmm. Wave 2, he was still, I think, the top deck. But when they started making nerfs between Waves 2 and Waves 3, I think it was during the Wave 3 nerfs that they it was during the Wave 2 nerfs that they nerfed Godrak himself. So initially Godrak stated that his Heroic Act would rotate all of your units to their final corner, thus triggering each effect between wherever it's at now and that final corner. The initial change that they really did to the deck actually didn't come in the form of Godrak. It came in the form of the stacking mechanic. So they did change that. For anybody who might not know, stacking units can only stack on top of other units that also have stacking now. Initially, the rules were stated that you could stack on top of a unit even if the unit that you were stacking on didn't have stacking, as long as the one you were playing on top of it did. Now both units have to have stacking in order for it to be played on top of another unit. And that was the first attempt to try and kind of knock Godrak down a little bit. However, still being able to rotate all of your units is a bit ridiculous. Mm-hmm. So they decided they needed to nerf it further, and what they did was, instead of it being all units, they actually brought it down to where it's only your auric units that get rotated to their final corner when you activate the Heroic Act. That made a slight change in the deck. You could no longer do things like using some of the Grot stacking units that were a little higher damage than some of the auric units, but that didn't destroy the deck at all. The deck is definitely still super viable. It also runs 2 different units that allow you to gain additional actions. It runs the Pouncing Wolf Rider, which is a beast and a Grot unit, and it's X1, X1, gain rotation actions and deal rotation damage. So that one gives you a little bit of damage and also some actions. And then there's what was the other one? Wah Chanters, I believe.
Wah Chanter, yeah.
That one is X111. So instead of getting damage, what happens is you get an additional rotation of gain actions. So the card actually reads that you just gain rotation actions instead of also doing damage. That one is an auric unit. So if you go to use Godrak's ability, his Heroic Act, whenever that card is on the field, you're also going to be gaining additional actions while doing damage. So the whole point of the deck is you want to kind of stack up your units. You definitely want to draw up early, the first turn or two at least, so you have a few units in your hand, and then you want to pop Rallying Cry. And what Rallying Cry does is it's just an ability, I believe it's neutral if I remember correctly, and it allows you to play 2 units from your hand. One really cool thing about that is, first of all, you can complete obviously an ability objective by playing that. However, since the deployment of a unit would be counted as a separate card, then the unit that you would deploy from Rally Cry could actually complete another quest on the same champion. So you can not only get 2 units out with a single action, but you can also complete 2 objectives, or even 3 if the other champion is on a unit as well, with a single action, which is an insane amount of progression in the game.
Which you can't gain, you can't complete more than 1 objective per card played, but how it works per turn. But how it works is you play the ability, and then deploying the units themselves count as deploying. It's not like the ability deploys the units. It's the ability just allows you to deploy units. Yeah. So it's a separate interaction. And something else that was really cool that I don't know if you knew this is Rallying Cry allows you to play 2 of the same units in the same turn.
I did not know that.
You can deploy 2. It doesn't count as playing that unit per turn. You can also play 1 unit manually first with your first action, and then your second action play Rallying Cry and play a second copy of that unit and something else, or even a third.
Yeah,
copy.
I did not know that. That makes that actually a whole lot better.
So it Rallying Cry bends the natural rules of the games on a couple different fronts.
Yeah.
Even though its natural power level is already high on its own, but it lets you get around other things also.
I would venture to say that as a standalone card, just the power that the card itself gives the player, Rally Cry is probably one of the most powerful cards in the game, and it's only, I want to say it's a common.
I think so, yeah.
It's definitely either a common or an uncommon.
That's one thing with the game that they did really good that I noticed was most of the super staple things that it's blatant that you're going to want in every deck, they're all commons.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, most of your, actually literally all of your removal abilities, no matter what faction it's for or what set it's from, comes in the form of a common. Now, I mean, you have other things that can remove things, and those don't necessarily come in common. A lot of those are rares or even maybe uncommons. But as far as your stapley like abilities that every deck of this specific Grand Alliance would want to run, those are all common, and it makes it very easy. And also the trial decks that you can buy, those have 2 copies of the Wave 1 removal. So that's pretty cool. That makes it super easy to be able to get your hands on. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up the discussion on Godrak. It's very much so just stack up and accumulate damage on your opponent, and then either when you see the best opportunity or the best opportunity you think you're going to get to use the ability, activate that ability, or whenever you can finish off your opponent, then you can activate that ability and potentially even catch them unaware. Oh, yes, Smash and Bash. So that is another card that needs to be discussed. It is a blessing that is in the Destruction deck that you will be running with Godrak. So what Smash and Bash does is it allows you, when you flip it, to rotate the units, any units that you have in play at the current time, to their final corners. So it's kind of like a mini Godrak, kind of like the old Godrak.
And it does 5 damage on top of the Godrak.
Yeah.
5 damage, and it's the original print of Godrak, the better version of Godrak. So while the Godrak is once per game, you do have access to the Godrak's ability in the form of a blessing at a different point in the game.
The downside to that, of course, being that unless you're running something like Grim Portents, where you can see what blessings are what and move them around, you don't really have any specific control over what blessing you're getting when you unlock the blessing. So sometimes Smash and Bash goes off and you're like, yeah, that won me the game. And then sometimes it's like, well, at least I did some damage.
It's 5 damage. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and you can try and wait to flip a blessing, having Smash and Bash in mind, where you're saying, I'm not going to flip this blessing until I have units that are worth rotating to the end, but you may just be holding yourself back.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's something that you can keep in mind. It's still, no matter, even if it's just the 5 damage, it is worth running the blessing. Simply because even if you only have 1 unit, I mean, you're probably going to be doing at least 6 to 8 damage on average. Sometimes a little higher than that. And if you have more than 1 unit, you're probably going to be doing a considerable amount of damage with this blessing. And then if you happen to be able to get it off when you have a full stacked row, like let's say you're about to Godrak, then you get the blessing. Well, now you don't have to Godrak, and you just basically won the game off flipping the blessing. And until next time, guys.
Later, guys. Bye.